This is not humanity versus technology. It's humanity with technology.
It's unfortunate the sensationalism around AI replacing people at their
Yeah.
work. What will replace people at work is organizations and leaders not investing in them upskilling or reskilling. AI will change the way work gets done.
Over time, AI and automation has the potential to make work more human,
Uh,
not less.
AI must, as a regulator, have human intelligence.
Hi, Zandy. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Let's face it. Artificial intelligence and automation are foundationally disrupting business. When you try to look even just a few years in the future, we know these changes are only going to keep coming, but it can be perplexing to know, like, where do you begin when it comes to preparing for those changes? What does it mean to lead when the capabilities of artificial intelligence eventually seem to rival human intelligence? What are the impacts on talent and skills? What do we need to do to not just stay relevant, but to thrive in the midst of all these changes? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Dr. Christie Smith is a visionary leader, author, and founder of the Humanities Studio, where she and her teams help executives unlock radical humanity to transform the way we work. She's a co author of an insightful new book entitled Essential: How Distributed Teams, Generative AI, and Global Shifts are creating a new human powered leadership. In today's discussion, you'll learn what human powered leadership means, and for that matter, what it doesn't mean. Christy will talk about how she sees the future unfolding with this relationship between technology and humanity. For example, will AI and automation make work less human or more? Well, you'll hear what Christy thinks about that. And before we're done, you'll learn what humans really need to thrive at work, what the power paradox is, and so much more. It's a conversation and a book that's important for our times, and I can't wait to share it with you. Hey, quick note, I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a global group of leaders who are committed to transforming our ability to lead and deliver. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week, and it's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Let's jump into today's discussion with Christy about her new book, Essential. Christy, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here.
It's clear from your book that you and your co-author love history, at least appreciate history, how it's led to where we are and the lessons, because let's face it, disruptions have been going on for a while, right? I'd like to start, how about this, with your history, okay? Long before Accenture, before Apple, before Deloitte, way back when you were growing up as the youngest of 8 children. Can you
Yeah.
think of anything from your family culture or early experiences that might have influenced how you would think about work or what it means to lead?
Well, I learned everything around our dining room table about those 2 things,
Yeah.
and, I think that, in all seriousness, growing up in my family, there were, clear expectations
Mm,
around and acknowledgement around being a, privileged white middle class
mm,
family. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s where, in New Jersey, where we were seeing racial riots happening in Newark, New Jersey, and in New York, where the women's movement was taking off. When you saw Vietnam and, the concern that one of my brothers would be drafted, just a world of unrest.
yeah.
And, my parents really believed that we had an obligation to be the voice for the voiceless and to
Mm.
speak up because of the privilege we enjoyed. Right. And so I think that watching all of those things unfold with my older brothers and sisters and this real ethos in our family of service, and service is what leadership looks like, you
Right.
know, and listen, there were times I remember my mother going into Newark, New Jersey to teach at an all boys black school because she believed that education was the way out. Leadership isn't always comfortable. In fact, it can be really hard when riots are going on. I mean, I remember my father just being angst and most of the times he drove her. But, leadership isn't comfortable.
Yeah.
It does
Yeah.
mean speaking out. It does mean certainly reflecting
Mhm.
in what has gone on in the past and learning those lessons. So we start the book from a history standpoint
Yeah.
because we endeavor to learn from our pasts of what went right and what went wrong. So that's the premise of my work and why I've done the work that I've done, but also the book.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
think it's easy to not know that about somebody, and what a gift that was to actually grow up and see it
Oh,
modeled, not just in theory, but like in practice. That's very cool. As you lay out in Essential, like you said, I mean, you you make it clear that technology has disrupted the workforce for generations. But Christy, what's unique about what we're going through now, and how's that led to a war for skills instead of a war for talent?
yeah, I think what's really unique about this time, Andy, is not just talking about AI and skills. It is the confluence of many things that are going on and that leaders are having to face. I mean,
Mm,
leadership is difficult. Why is it so difficult today? Well, you've got socio-political and economic issues that are headwinds that are being created for leaders like we've never seen before. You have war in two areas. You have got trade wars that are happening. You've got a skills shortage. You have an increasing mental health pandemic around the world. And you've got the influx of some of the most incredible innovations around technologies that we've ever seen. So many people are talking about one aspect of these things, right, in depth, which, I'm grateful for. What I think we uniquely wanted to do is look at the breadth of these things and how it is impacting both employees and leaders today, because you cannot silo these things out. As leaders in corporations are moving from the fiduciary of, shareholders or the business to global citizens, global leaders, we need to be able to look at, and they need to be able to look at the confluence of all of these things and understand how to manage it and lead through it.
You used a term I seem to call in that section the unicorn job, and I'd never heard it quite talked about that way. Would you mind just mentioning what that is? Because I think once you have a word, vocabulary matters, right? Once you have a word for it, you can start seeing it. What does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, it means that that unique skill and capability that you have creating that kind of unicorn job or unicorn skill that is so relevant to not only the need of the organization but the need to any employer is outpaced by other skills and other roles within an organization. So, one of the very popular things that we tend to talk about, but not enough, is well, what are critical roles in organizations? What are those 15 to 20 roles within an organization that are disproportionately more impactful to the business bottom line and to customers than any others? Well, that requires some of that kind of unicorn capability that you bring to your work that marries both technology and the human intelligence needed to deploy it.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly how I said it, but it's along the lines of maybe in the past we need a software developer, but now we need a software developer with this and this and this and
Exactly.
this. And it's
That's
like
exactly right.
and it's so increasingly difficult to find that exact match. And
That's exactly right.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly right.
We'll get into what you mean by a human powered approach, but first, how about this? What does a human powered approach not mean? Is I think it could potentially be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that listen, we have, this kind of what we do in the book and purposefully around looking at the history of leadership itself
Mhm.
and the purpose it's played in organizations is, you know, it evolves in reality to the times that we find ourselves
Mm.
in. And so we have for very long periods of time kind of made heroes of this command and control. In the tech industry, we idolize leaders who are bombastic and threatening and not very nice, right? And say, well, their genius gives them a pass.
Mm.
It's simply not the truth. And so, a not human powered leader is someone who uh, finds their own self as godlike and as ego driven, that it's all about them, and without them, the world wouldn't exist. It is
Mm,
that kind of leader who is living in their own world.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I see what you're saying, and actually, that's not what I was thinking. But I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's important to recognize as well. You know what I was thinking was, I think someone might think it means just be nice.
Yeah,
You
no.
know what I'm saying? Like, oh, just
Yeah,
be more empathetic,
yeah.
or it just, and it almost sounds like political correctness, not necessarily to the tune of what you're trying to get to.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you raised that. I mean, I
Yeah,
think the book hits on both those points,
right. I
both
agree.
that kind of ego-driven command
Hmm.
and control, as well as, the fact that, this isn't soft work.
Hmm. Right.
Right? We're gonna be in an economic crisis. We already are leading that way because leaders are not in tune to the humans that are in their organizations.
Yeah.
And so, some of I think about this I've been an athlete all my life, and I think about some of the coaches that I've had who just were unbelievably demanding in sprints, in running, in whatever I had to do to the point that I wanted to get sick,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I loved them. They weren't soft and easy,
Yeah, right,
you
right.
know? And I've had leaders like that.
Yeah,
I've
right.
worked with leaders who have had very high standards because they knew if I really put my nose to the grindstone, I'd meet that standard.
Mhm.
And they
Yeah.
gave me all the resources and capabilities to do that. But they didn't do it because they wanted something. It was about them. They did it because they were pushing me to be either the best athlete or the best corporate athlete that I could be.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said it that way because I think that gives people a better idea of the angle you take on this. It's not just to be soft, warm, and fuzzy, but it's this
Mhm.
high standards, high devotion, high standards. But you're not a resource. You're not just a number. You're not just an FTE. And so yeah. Thank you for explaining that. For a while it's been said AI won't take your job. Someone using AI will take your job. So from where we sit now, in what ways do you agree and maybe disagree with that statement? And how does that kind of fit in to how you're thinking about management and leadership these days?
Yeah, it's unfortunate the sensationalism around AI replacing people at their
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
right? What will replace people at work is organizations and leaders not investing in them upskilling or reskilling.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
You
a good
know,
way to say it.
I
Yeah.
mean, I believe very strongly. I mean, certainly automation will change things, right? AI will change the way work gets done. It will provide outputs that need analysis and need contextual competence to understand them. It will need, to understand the governance, right, and the security around all of those things. That's a skill applied to a tool, right?
Mhm.
And we need to make sure in our organizations that we are not only investing the money, but the time to give to employees and leaders themselves to upskill and reskill. I can't tell you how many senior leaders I've worked with. In the book, we talked to thousands of leaders around the globe. And, all of them, 100% of them said, "We know we need to do something differently given the fact of technology and employee disengagement and all of these kind of things." 100% said they knew they needed to do something, yet only 25% were even thinking of doing something about it.
So,
That's staggering, right?
do you think
And
it's like being paralyzed? Was that what it kind of was? Like, I know I need to do something,
paralyzed
but yeah.
100% paralyzed, but
Mhm.
also not taking the time to invest in themselves to
Mm.
understand the technology,
Right.
understand the trends and why, understand what was going on the front lines for their employees. I mean, if your schedule, Andy, is anything like mine used to be, I used to wake up at 5 in the morning. It's a curse living on the West Coast.
Right.
5 in the morning to take, conference calls, and it was 5 to, 7 at night with very little breaks.
Yeah.
I ate at my desk, I ate through meetings, it was insane,
Yeah.
right?
Uh,
This is the reality of most leaders today, that they're back to back to back like this. We are not investing, and they are not investing in their own development so that they can understand the utilization of these kinds of tools and assets in their organization. Understandably, they're abdicating that to their chief technology officer or data officer without full understanding of implication.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I'd say there's some areas disrupted a lot more quickly than I thought were, like in terms of like
Mhm.
AI art. I mean, I never would have thought that, but like I had a friend who's a voiceover artist. Man, did that change really quickly. So there's some areas that have changed faster, but I think there's a strong bias, and I mean that in a good way, of this is not humanity versus technology. Your vision on this one, it's humanity with technology, right? It's
Oh,
and how do we
absolutely.
upskill with instead of fear, it's agency, and how do we work together on that? I mean, that's kind of more of the worldview of this book, right?
Yeah, 100% right. I mean, we
Yeah.
talk about, certainly human intelligence and AI, right? And the
Mhm,
business, right?
mhm,
AI, we got to remember at this stage, AI is always backward looking.
mm,
It is biased in nature based on where they're drawing the data,
mhm.
right?
Right.
And it is not able to fully, I mean, there is some contextual, capability with AI, but not fully understand
Mm,
the context in which the solution or the information or the action from AI, where that falls,
yeah,
right?
right, right.
Because they can't fully understand the human makeup of where that information gets deployed in terms of a team, that team's capability to the customer, understanding the customer deeply, right?
Mhm.
All of these things. So the issue isn't that AI is taking over. The issue is AI must, as a regulator, have in human intelligence,
Right.
right?
100%. And my take from the book is because of what you're saying, over time, AI and automation has the potential to make work more human, not less. But would you tell us more about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we found in the book, which is a requirement of employees, is that they require from their organizations the ability to connect.
Yeah. Right.
Right? Now, that's multidimensional and,
Mhm,
we go into it in the book. But
mhm.
one of the ways to free up time to connect is to use AI. It can absolutely accelerate, administrative tasks, more menial tasks, if you
Right.
will, so that employees can engage in meaningful discussion around the output
Mhm.
or around strategy or around impact to customer, all of these things. So we shouldn't be thinking, I think the mistake that we're making right now, and there was a great New York Times article about this, is that right now we are expecting employees to learn AI side of desk.
Mm.
They have those calendars like I talked about I used to have, and then they're saying, "Okay, learn the AI, and then, you know, employ it in your workday." Well, that's ridiculous, right?
Mm,
And so people are saying, "I'm not gonna I don't have time to learn it, so I'll just do it the way I've always done it.
mm.
It's safer."
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And then they don't have the time to connect, right?
Yeah.
But I do think AI is extremely important to giving humans the opportunity to connect with the right information, to discern, to discuss, to, ideate, to invent, all of those things. It will allow us to have more time if leaders structure work in the right way.
One of the things I struggled with when I first got an administrative assistant, I don't know if you remember when you first got one, it's like, what do I do? What do I delegate to him? Like,
Yeah.
and I kind of think of it in that sort of way that by delegating more, it frees up more time for the other sort of conversations. And it's not a perfect metaphor, but I think there is an element of which I don't get upset if my intern has a hallucination, so to speak. I
Yeah.
expect, yeah. And
Yeah.
so this idea of work with instead of I'm afraid that intern's going to take my job.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. No, I mean, like, in terms of an assistant, it's, when you go from corporate jobs like I've had to, actually starting your own firm, you don't have an assistant.
Right, yeah.
So there are some great AI tools that I'm actually
Absolutely.
using.
Yeah,
I do have an assistant now, but, I'm working with her on much more strategic things that I
yeah,
need to get done,
yeah,
and that is upskilling her.
yeah, right, for
And
sure.
reskilling her because I really think that when, the calendaring and all of that stuff, the flights and all of that stuff that, we used to have our admins
Mhm.
great help with. They were my boss. Now have them as a true partner in the business
Right.
is just incredibly freeing and empowering for at least my assistant.
Yeah. No, I agree. In fact, we get administrative assistants who show up for our project management classes now because
Yeah,
they're not, and when I mean this, they're not secretaries, if you know what I mean. It's like they're not doing just
yeah,
purely admin work. So it's actually, I think it illustrates what you're talking about here. And you have a section of the book, which I mean, each of these sections I feel like is worth the price of the book alone. But what is it that we need as humans? And you talk about,
yeah,
if I remember right, purpose and
yep,
agency and well-being. You talked about connection.
yeah,
People need to get the full book to get all this. But I was
yeah,
struck by a quote. It's not even a major point in the book, but I just couldn't get past it. At the end of the chapter on agency, it says,
mhm,
adversity is a terrible thing to waste.
yeah.
Would you tell us more about what that means and maybe how that fits into this whole human powered leader thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the ability to kind of be resilient,
Hmm.
in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
We are going to have, I mean, this moment in leadership, as I said, is like none other. And for us to have the ability and the agency to deal with that adversity in a way that we are growing and we are connecting and we are innovating, and I think is worth the price of gold,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about macro adversity,
Mhm.
right? We start the book by reflecting back in the Renaissance period.
Right.
The Renaissance period grew out of the Black Death in Europe, the most devastating time in European history and really global history,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But what came of afterwards, the Renaissance, was this 1000% human centric growth of innovation in sciences, in architecture, in art, in music, in the humanities. I mean, it was arguably one of the most explosive times in our history, coming out of, you know, coming out of the adversity
Mhm.
of the Black Death.
Right.
The exact same parallel is
Hmm.
COVID,
Right.
right? And I think that it's interesting today is that, we have come out of COVID, and yes, we've seen some of all of those blessings of the Renaissance,
Hmm.
increase in science and innovation and the humanities and all of that. But we have very short term memory.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
And we are now, saying that we want to go back to some control. And that adversity that we all went through is being kind of forgotten. And it's
Crazy.
actually what is the strength in what has been this explosion of humanity after COVID.
I don't remember exactly how Ed Shine said, the guy who coined the term corporate culture, but we had him on twice before he died.
Oh,
He said
yeah.
something along the lines of, there's anxiety, in this case, we'll say in adversity. It's not his direct quote, but there's anxiety. Right? There's anxiety, this is disruption. But he said, we really don't make change. Because of that anxiety, we don't make change until, what is it? Survival anxiety exceeds learning anxiety. And that's what came to mind when I read that quote. That I'm so
Yeah,
glad you and Kelly include that because we're at a point. Let's not wait until we feel like it's survival. Let's take this
exactly.
adversity and the uncomfortableness and let's find new solutions. Right? We have agency. It's such a
Yeah.
hopeful chapter. There,
Yeah. And
Christy.
and the discourse. I mean,
Yeah.
the unfortunate part in what we are not embracing about adversity is that we are so polarized
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
our communication,
Yeah.
in our thinking, in our politics, in our companies, all of these things, right?
Yeah. Right.
The ability to hold conversations in the middle in order to have civil discourse around adversity and how we get through it, not abandon it or go around it, but really get through it is what actually leads to incredible innovation and engagement
Right.
of your employees.
Yeah. In many ways, that's a banner over your career of
Yeah,
helping organizations to have those sorts of
yeah,
conversations, you know? Yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned connection, and I just think it's interesting in a world where there's still a lot of distributed work and probably going to be around for a long time. Like, have you seen any ways that organizations have attempted to safeguard connection in spite of, or, still in this AI and distributed work environment?
I think a couple things. Let me say this. The return to office mandates that have gone out. Listen, I understand them. There's certain areas of work and of jobs that require that kind of in-person, you know, get it done kind of atmosphere.
Mhm.
But to blanket it across an organization, I think is just a fundamental lack of imagination. It's a lack of really being curious in terms of how work should be done, where work gets done, how do we structure it, who are the people, how do we structure a team, right? How do we maximize the impact of that team because we know the individual's contribution and we know the headwinds that individual might be facing. So I think that while RTO has been a way to answer the how do we build culture and how do we build connection, actually not working. I mean, a
Mm.
most recent study found that 1 in 4 employees who have returned to work feel lonely.
Ironically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not as simple as the solution that is being, touted out there. It's not that simple, right? Where I
Mhm.
have seen great success is where leaders actually architect the work
Mm.
around the team. I have been incredibly blessed to spend the largest portion of my career at Deloitte, where they really talked about this idea of predictability and flexibility. In that, when we designed teams working on big technological projects, we sat down with our clients and we said, okay, let's work on predictability and flexibility. How do we really inject what the humans on this team need for the duration of this project because technology implementations are really hard. And
Mhm.
so that looked like, well, Christy, has a basketball game on Thursday nights. Who's going to cover her? So
Mhm.
she can go to that. Or, so and so, Tom wants to is coaching his soccer team. Who can cover for those hours he's coaching the team? Those kinds of things we built in,
That's
right?
cool.
Somebody else is, running a triathlon or somebody else just does a meditation practice, so they're
Mhm.
not gonna show up, We built safeguards in for covering those people when so that they could enjoy the things that they needed to do. And the success and engagement rates, went out the roof. So that's one really simple thing to do is how do we want to architect the work we need to get done? The second is, simple things. Like, if you have a distributed team, well, why don't you look at where your distributed teams are via zip codes?
Mm.
And if there's a mass in a couple of zip codes that are right close to each other, then say quarterly, we're going to pay for a big dinner for you guys all to get together.
Nice.
You know, I mean, this isn't rocket science, but it makes a huge difference to one feeling engaged, one feeling seen, heard, and valued.
I know some teams that they'll do a personal and professional check-in at the beginning of the meeting instead of just jump into the agenda. It's just like, hey, what's going on, and people are encouraged to be free of like life sucks right now. I mean, it doesn't have to be like an Instagram post, right? It could just be like a reality of what's going on as a way to form connection.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about it, a circumstance in the book about this, where I was working with a leader who, the pride of the organization was just boom, 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 get stuff done, right? And this leader started their meetings, every Monday with an agenda and ripped through that agenda, and really never looking up unless he was looking at the person who needed to do what was on the agenda item.
Yeah.
And he asked me to sit in because he wasn't really connecting with the team, and so
Mhm.
I sat in on a couple, and one of them that I sat in was the Monday after the Parkland shooting.
Mm.
He started to rip through the agenda and people were despondent. I mean, they were kind of looking around. Now, they didn't live anywhere near Florida where that horrible massacre happened, but they had kids who were that age,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they were completely distracted, right? And so we left that meeting and he said, "What was going on?" I mean, the energy was really bad. And I said, I pointed out to them, "Do you know what happened this weekend?" "Oh my God, it was horrible." And I said, "Do you think that was on anybody's mind?"
Mm.
And so what he did the next time is exactly what you're saying. So he started the meeting with, "Hey, how's everybody doing? Have a good weekend?" And, everybody, of course, was like, "What? Who's taking our boss? Like,
Was it
what
on the
is
agenda?
happening?" Yeah, yeah, and they were totally, just totally, you know,
Right.
discombobulated by that
Right.
start, and he said, "Hey, listen, I know I've come in and I've ripped through the agenda. I really do wanna know how you guys are."
Mm.
And now he takes, the first 5 to 10 minutes,
Nice.
of the meeting, and he connects with people. The engagement on that team, the leaning in, just the body language. He said everybody's, like, over on the desk and leaning in and, connecting in a way that they hadn't before. So, simple things like that.
I'm so glad you shared that. I'm intrigued by the notion of the power paradox that you talk about in the book, because I think as we think about doubling down on our soft skills or power skills, like you call them, what do we need to remember? Because I think we see the power paradox in other people, but we don't see it in ourselves sometimes.
Well, I don't think we see it in ourselves. I mean,
Mhm.
what we really wanted to articulate in the book, with regards to this is that, most leaders get to the position that they're in because of their technical capability.
Mm.
And then when they realize that they're managing humans, which they're not used to doing and haven't been trained to do, and all of those kinds of things, they double down on that kind of control, that power.
Yeah.
Right? And in fact, that's the most damaging thing to do, right? And so, going back to what we talked about earlier, this isn't a book that is promoting kumbaya
Right.
and soft skills. This is a book that is saying we must have, given the complexity of the workforce, we must have skills and capabilities around the humans in our organizations. That's the real power
Mm.
in understanding human nature, not the control of a project plan or
Yeah.
an outcome or a product or anything like that, right? And we have to build those capabilities. Now, we talk about power skills, and they've been talked about for forever, like communication and transparency and all the human intelligence type
Right.
attributes that are talked about. But that is simply not enough today.
Mm.
Right? And so we need to move from emotional intelligence to emotional maturity.
Mm.
And we need emotionally mature leaders who actually aren't enamored with themselves, but suspend self interest and who are insatiably curious and who understand the context in which their employees are coming to work and who have the capability of building cultures and development of their people in order to drive business growth objectives, right?
Yeah.
But that power paradox is really, born out of, first of all, how did leaders get there?
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
got there because they're technically great, but they
Yeah.
may be the worst people you could ever imagine.
And as we get more
And
power,
where is the
we
power?
might, yeah, we
Yeah,
might actually start acting like that powerful person. Like we start reading our own press release, sort of
yeah.
thing. And yeah, you've mentioned curiosity a couple times, and here's yeah, I don't really know you that well, but I read your book. I feel like I know you a little bit now, and you strike me as a genuinely curious person. Okay, so
Yeah.
how do you personally, Christy, try to cultivate an insatiable curiosity, like you say in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it goes back to, where you started with me is, how did I grow up? What
Mhm.
interested me? I was a history major in college,
Mm.
and then a social worker. I was
Checks you out.
trained as a social worker.
Yeah.
Growing up in a big family, I was fascinated by systems, and one might say that we had a family culture, but a lot of subcultures within
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Right? And so I'm deeply, deeply curious on what makes people tick,
Yeah.
right? And I was trained that way,
Mm.
right? How do you understand that? How do you understand not only how one thinks, but also the context in which they live and
Yeah.
work, and how do we improve that, right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, I mean, I'm deeply curious about the human condition and how I can be one instrument to help people reach, beyond their potential. I've had many people who've worked with me in the past who said, you pushed me like that coach I was talking about.
Right. Yeah.
You pushed me beyond what I thought I was capable of, and you gave me tasks and assignments that where I thought I wasn't ready for, and I was. You helped me
Mm.
get there. You were the safety net, you
Yeah.
know? You can't be that if you don't intimately know a human being, right?
Mhm.
If you aren't curious about them. I'm deeply curious about the context in which people are, living, working, and that they don't have the same experience that I do. How could
Yeah.
you?
Right.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
How do you filter you're gonna filter the world very differently than I do. And so the conditions in the world on a micro, meso, and macro level will impact us all. What does that mean to you? What does that mean in showing up? What does that mean in terms of your sense of worth, right? So yeah, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that.
It's like the ultimate hack in just almost every domain. If you
Yeah,
could just tell me more, right? If you
yeah,
can just, get so much mileage out of just those 3 words, yeah. We could talk so much about other things, but let's end with this. Let's say a listener is a parent and they feel perplexed about what the world of work might look like for their children when they hit the workforce. And we're not asking you to predict what jobs will or won't be around, but what are some thoughts you might share with them about how to prepare their kids to thrive in the workplace of the future?
yeah. I think that, work for, kids who are going through college now and coming out, it's not gonna look the same way it did for you as
Yeah,
a parent,
yeah.
right? It may look very, very, very different, meaning that those kids might decide to be a freelancer.
Mhm.
They might decide to work and for companies as a freelancer that they believe that that company is doing good in the world.
Yeah.
The way they judge a company is very different than we did coming up,
Mhm.
right? And the access to information is that company's insides match their outsides? Are they really a good company? Is the leader a jerk? They're able to find all of that information, and they want to associate with something they believe is meaningful. And it might not come with the kind of corporate jobs we all went into. They certainly won't work in the same way we did,
Mhm.
in terms of they will fit work into their lives. Ability to work when they're the strongest and when they want to and get it done. That's why structuring of work for leaders is so important. That's going to matter to them greatly. Community is going to matter to them more than anything else. For those coming out of school, they're going to have that continuous learning mindset and continuous growth mindset because the technology is changing so greatly. Listen, they're better at learning new technology than we will ever be. My generation will ever be. And they're adapting much, much, much faster than we are. And so, they are going to be frustrated that older leaders don't trust their judgment or trust that they know how to use the data or use the new technology. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I mean, the fastest part of our economy right now are those fractional workers, and it's mostly younger generation. Interestingly, it's mostly youngest generation and boomers
Yeah,
who are filling the void, filling those fractional roles. So I would say hold judgment, parents.
yeah.
Really watch your kids thrive in a way that's very different and be curious as to why they've chosen those paths.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, Christy. Every once in a while I hear somebody, not often, but every once in a while I hear somebody say, "Oh, school's finally done." It's like, actually, it's just starting.
Never done. Yeah, exactly. That's
Uh,
exactly right.
and so
Yeah,
I feel like as a parent, sometimes I want to make sure I'm not just what's the grade, what's the grade. It's
yeah,
trying to everything to encourage the joy of learning and try to
absolutely.
model, right? That we model for
That's
our
a
kids
100
also.
yep,
Yeah,
100%. I got 2
yeah,
18-year-olds going to college next year, so,
yeah.
be
Twins?
really good. Yeah, well, yes. I
Almost.
mean, yeah, almost twins. We adopted them at birth, and they
Yeah, very
were
cool. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, hey, for those listening, you just gotten a brief introduction to what's in Christie's new book. If you'd like to get a helpful perspective on the future of work and actionable advice to bring out the best in your teams, get a copy of Christie's new book, Essential. Put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Christy, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
This was really fun, Andy. Thank you.
Well, special thanks to Christy for joining us here on the People and Projects podcast. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. Just as we wrapped up the interview, actually, it's in the outtakes. She's just a really easy person to talk with. And I think what you'd find in the book is that it's easy to digest, even though there's a lot of research that backs it up, which is nice. It also doesn't come off as an academic sort of book. The fact I didn't know that Christy, she mentioned in the interview that she is a history major, I think she said, and there is, I think, a helpful perspective that's in the book through the lens of history, because there's been disruption. As actually, we talked a little bit about it during the interview, all throughout our time. And so trying to get some perspective and what are some lessons learned through that, I thought that was good. And I really agree with the premise that it's your people skills that are going to be more important than ever now. Because it is tech and people. It's less about, is AI going to take your job? It's more of, how can you work with the technologies? And as people get so wrapped up in the tech, if you have the ability to interact with people and influence them and look them in the eye and carry on conversations. It doesn't mean extroversion. You can still be introverted and do some of that quite well. But I'm just saying, it's these people skills that you're invested in. And that's why, even though this is a project management podcast, it's really a leadership podcast. It's so much on the people side just because of that. And so I wouldn't say this is necessarily a must read, but I think it's a good read. I think it reinforces what a lot of us need to hear about the technology, and all this stuff is going to keep changing. How can we make sure that we invest in the humanity side, the people side of it, for our teams and for us as well? If you happen to pick up a copy of the book, I'd love to hear what you take away from it. You can reach me at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Whether it's from the book or today's interview, I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you'd like more on this topic, I put links in the show notes to episode 437. That was with Nada Sanders. She wrote a book called The Hum Machine, and it's like human and machine all in one word, Huma Machine. And I think it's probably a better discussion than it was a book, but I do recommend the discussion. It's episode 437. Then episode 382 with Hal Hirschfield. All right, so here's the deal. Hal is a hardcore researcher, but it's an interesting book about your future and balancing the now, which of course we have to deal with, but also preparing for the future. Some really interesting perspectives in that book. That's episode 382 with Hal Hirschfield. And then episode 329 with Deborah Westfall. Once again, I think a better interview than book. And I mean, get the book, but I just think the way that we had the conversation, I think was very helpful about how do you prepare your career and your team for the future. So check out the links in the show notes for those. And if you have a certification from the Project Management Institute, right, that you can get free PDUs for listening to those episodes. So check out the show notes for a link about how do you report those PDUs, because I'd love to make sure you get credit for those. And can I ask you a favor? If you're enjoying these episodes, if you haven't done it, or if you haven't done it in a while, could you leave a review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you consume your podcast? For some reason, the way the algorithm works is that when you do that, it actually makes it available to more people. So on behalf of me and my team, thank you so much for being a part of this family of the People and Projects podcast. Thank you.